Hey, what is up guys, and welcome to Star Wars Real Talk. Today we're going to be talking about my favorite thing from the sequel trilogy, that is Kylo Ren. I think they did his character almost perfect. There are some things that could have been better, but overall, he was my favorite character of the sequel trilogy. Every time he was on the screen, I got excited, and despite all the flaws and hiccups the sequel trilogy has with writing, I really like Kylo Ren. I think the way they executed his character in Episode 7 was done to perfection. I think that it was the perfect introduction to a new villain. What we're used to seeing from protagonists like Luke and Anakin is being pulled to the dark side, getting that draw to the dark side. We are not used to seeing someone who is in the light side trying to submerge himself into the dark side. That is a fresh and original idea. I love that. A character that is being pulled to the light no matter how hard he tries and fights to stay in the darkness. He's constantly being pulled to the light. I thought that was super refreshing. And I thought that him having to kill his own father was brilliantly written, because it wasn't the protagonist making some sacrifice for the good side, it was the antagonist making a sacrifice for himself, and it wasn't necessarily for the best, but it was what he felt he had to do to progress himself towards the dark side. I think the fact that he's Darth Vader's grandson could have been done a lot worse. It could have been a lot more cheesy or predictable, but I think it was done really well. Like, he tried to detach himself from the family that he did have, because it's not like he was an orphan and he only had Darth Vader to look up to. He had a family who he detached himself with because he found Darth Vader a more favorable role model. And while he has his normal family trying to pull him to the light, he leans to the other side of his family who's pulling him towards the dark. I like that he didn't have some typical tragic upbringing like that Anakin did, where he was kind of getting screwed his entire life. Nothing ever worked out for him. Everyone he loved and cared for died. Kylo didn't have that same upbringing, yet he's still the antagonist of the movie. And it's hard to pity him because he has a family that loves him. He knows it. We, the audience, know it. And yet he still chooses the dark side. It really makes him an interesting character, because you really just want to understand why. Why reject the light so hard? Of course, we do find out more about that in Episode 8, but we'll talk about that in a second. I think after such a large gap after the prequels and an even larger gap after the OT, to make a sequel trilogy would be difficult, even more difficult to make a convincing villain that everybody finds believable and don't see him as just a cliche. Like, yes, he does have Skywalker blood in him, but he's not starting off as the protagonist. Rey's the protagonist, and, well, she wasn't supposed to be a Skywalker. They kind of copped out and gave her the Skywalker name at the end anyway, but she wasn't supposed to be a Skywalker. This was supposed to be, the Skywalker was starting off on the other side, right? And that was such a refreshing idea. I mean, technically in the OT, Darth Vader was a Skywalker and he started off on the other side, but it's different because the movies follow Luke. I also love Kylo's lightsaber. It's a little bit more creative than you'd think it would be. At first, I thought it was just going to be they're trying to make a new cool lightsaber, like what they did with Darth Maul, trying to excite people about a new trilogy, and in a way, it also served that purpose. Everyone just assumed that those were crossguards sticking out of the side of the hilt, making two smaller blades on the side, kind of replicating like an old knight's sword. And while they can serve that purpose as a crossguard to protect one's wrist or arm from being chopped off, which is a popular theme in the Star Wars universe, those are actually exhaust ports. So when Kylo made his lightsaber, he didn't have any Jedi Order or any master to instruct him on how to properly build a lightsaber. Rey never had to build the lightsaber in all three of the movies. She does at the end after Episode 9. Don't know how she does that, especially using parts of her staff. But Kylo never had any master or any proper tools or equipment to correctly make a lightsaber. In fact, the kyber crystal inside the lightsaber is cracked. That's why the blade is so staticky and shocky and crackly. The cracked crystal exerts so much power that it needed a couple exhaust ports just to shoot that extra energy out. Otherwise, the lightsaber would just probably blow up in Kylo's hand when he goes to ignite it. And I like the way that it is kind of assembled by him, and it's not exactly perfect, but he did the best he could with the tools he had, because it kind of replicates himself as a person. It replicates himself as a villain, as someone who's trying to pursue the dark side and the dark way of doing things, but he doesn't actually have a proper teacher to do these things. The lightsaber kind of reflects that. I think that's a really nice touch. Now, when I say he didn't have a proper master, you could argue that he had Snoke. Well, we now know that Snoke was Palpatine, but at the time, we didn't know anything about Snoke, and we just assumed that he was, a non-lightsaber wielding Sith who more leaned towards the Force as opposed to wielding a lightsaber. That's not a surprise. He's not the first Sith to be like this. Also, Snoke was pretty hands-off. He was never really in the same room with Kylo for any of the movies, only for a couple moments here and there, often as appearing as a hologram. He didn't really seem like a very hands-on teacher. He more sent Kylo to go do things, do this, do that, prove yourself in this way and that way. Maybe not necessarily correctly teaching him the correct martial arts or how to actually build a lightsaber or, any of the basic stuff. Again, I'm assuming because we haven't seen it in the movies. Which is probably why he looked to Darth Vader so much, because Darth Vader was that person. He was that role model that he wanted. He was the real family figure that he wanted in his life. So, Episode 7 Kylo is definitely my favorite because in Episode 8, they don't really do much with his character. I was hoping, over the course of the 3 movies, he was going to have this big, full, developing character arc like Luke and Anakin had. Unfortunately, really neither he or Rey had the justice of a full developing character arc. In Episode 7, he looked really mad because he was so conflicted. He had temper tantrums, which I think was awesome because all the Sith that we usually see are, they're grounded and centered and calm, while the usual antagonists use their anger to fuel their dark side power. Kylo just kind of lets loose. He never had anyone to keep him in check, and I think that was very appropriate for his character in Episode 7. I loved his temper tantrums. They were like my favorite thing about him. But in Episode 8, I don't think Rian Johnson knew what he wanted to do with Kylo because all that Kylo did was go from mad to more mad. He kills Snoke and becomes the supreme leader of the First Order, but he didn't really seem like he wanted that. He seemed like he wanted control of his destiny. He wanted to be free from Snoke. He wanted to call his own shots, shape his own person, but he didn't really seem like he wanted to be the supreme leader. Hux looked like he wanted that position, and he did. And I think that they did Hux a little bit dirty here because I think he would have fit that role really well, and it would have been really cool to see him as the main bad guy and Kylo as serving him because that seems to be more Kylo's role. He didn't really seem to be a good leader in any of the movies. He just pursued his own interests and used the entire First Order to just accomplish all of his selfish goals. I mean, logistically looking at it, I don't think he was the best fit for that position in the movies. So when he had temper tantrums in Episode 8, it was a little bit weird because at this point in the trilogy we were expecting to see a little bit more maturity and growth from his character. We didn't really see any of that. He just continued down the path that he was on, and he still had this confliction between the dark side and the light, which is a little bit odd because going into the final movie we should know where Kylo Ren stands. That still shouldn't be up in the air. What really set him off on this path to the dark side was Luke assassinating him in his sleep, which really doesn't make sense. But okay, ignoring the development of Luke's character, just focusing on Kylo, this is fine for the purpose of him pursuing this path down the dark side. While I do have a problem with Luke acting this way, I don't have a problem with this happening to Kylo. So basically we learned a little bit more about his backstory, which is good, but it really didn't affect his character at all in Episode 8, which is bad. Oh yeah, the mask. We have to talk about the mask. I think the mask is really good. I think it's cool. It could seem like a cheap Vader knockoff, but it doesn't. It just seems like he's trying to be like Vader. It doesn't seem like they're trying to make a new Darth Vader. It just seems like a guy looking up to his role model. He's just trying to command that same intimidation that Darth Vader's helmet brought. When Vader entered the room and his voice was a little bit distorted through the filters and through the voice box, Kylo was trying to emulate that fear and intimidation, so it makes sense. And in my own personal opinion, I love it way more when he has the hood on. He looks way more cool and way more badass. That's just my opinion. It has no bearing on his character at all. I hated that Snoke made him destroy the mask. I get why Snoke said that. I get why they wrote that in, but I hated that they did it because the mask is just cool, and I hated that Kylo had to destroy that part of himself. But one could argue that that was part of his development because he was doing what Snoke told him to do by destroying the mask, but then he kills Snoke and reclaims himself in the end. And then fortunately J.J. Abrams had him fix his helmet, which was awesome. I was really glad to see Kylo walking around with the helmet again. Episode 9 attempted to finish his character arc. I didn't hate the end result, but I'm not a huge fan of the way that they got there, of him turning to the light side. It didn't really make sense because it happened while he was mid-combat. Leia does it as her dying wish. Somehow, we don't know what she says or what she did, but somehow she convinces him to turn to the light side. And then he has a moment with Han, which seems like he's a Force ghost, but he's more memory, whatever. I think that was a beautiful scene. That's fine. I don't mind that he turned to the light side in the end. I just think that they could have done a lot better of a job doing that, where he finally caves into the light side. It makes sense that he did it, just not really how he did it or why he did it. In my own personal opinion, I kind of wish that Kylo had ended up being the hero in the end and Rey ended up being the villain, because the whole trilogy, Rey was being pulled to the dark side and Kylo was being pulled to the light. So I think that that would have been an incredibly refreshing and original twist to have at the end of a trilogy where the hero becomes the villain becomes the hero. That would have been a much more fantastic ending than just Palpatine being the main villain and Kylo facing off against him. I really hate that he had to die at the end. I'm not going to get into Force healing or my feelings on that. I think I just liked him a lot more than I liked Rey in this trilogy, and I wish that at the end Rey had become the villain, Kylo either killed or saved her, but he would still be the hero in the end, and then he could be the one rising as a Skywalker because he has Skywalker blood in his veins. He's rising like a phoenix from the ashes, from the dark side to the light side. It makes a lot more sense. Also, all through episode 9, he really seemed like finally set in the dark side. Like, I was really relieved to see that. He seemed like he didn't have much of a temper, like he was more calm and commanding, like he knew what he knew, he was firm in his beliefs. The whole movie, he's trying to convince Rey to join him, and he doesn't seem to be wavering or conflicted at all. He really seems to be set on his path. So I was like, oh great, we don't have to see the temper anymore, we don't have to see the conflicting pulls to the light side. Kylo Ren is finally establishing who he is, which is fine, I just wanted to see his character get established in some way, because it had been up in the air for 2 full movies. And then in the end, when he switches back to the light side, while I didn't hate the twist, I just don't really understand how or why it happened, and it didn't feel very fulfilling. It didn't really feel like it made sense. I think the issues with his character development and his character arc would have been fixed if we had just had one director plan out 3 movies. J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson had conflicting views for how Kylo was supposed to be or how he was supposed to develop, but I think in the end, Kylo Ren was pretty well done. Considering how poorly the rest of the trilogy went, I really liked Kylo Ren, and I think he is my favorite thing about the sequels.